Good evening and thank you for joining us. More protests in support of BC's Wet'suwet'en Nation are popping up across Canada. In Ontario, an ongoing demonstration has caused operations at the country's largest freight rail carrier, CN Railway, to grind to a halt. The company has suspended its network east of Toronto for the foreseeable future. Today, Canada's Indigenous Services Minister came face to face with protesters in the hopes of ending the blockade. Kamil Karamali has our top story tonight.
Thank you.
This meeting between Canada's Indigenous Services Minister and the Mohawk First Nation is crucial to get the country back to business.
This is a situation that's very tense, very volatile.
After days of a cross-country shutdown of Canada's rail lines, Marc Miller stepped in to try to put an end to the blockade in eastern Ontario.
All of Canada is hurting. The economy is slowing down. Everyone knows the reports about supply shortages.
It's been 10 days since the protests began in Belleville, Ontario, a major hub that connects Canada's capital to Montreal and Toronto. It's a key artery for transporting goods and travelers, but that's all come to a standstill. Via Rail says it's had to cancel nearly 300 trains, affecting more than 60,000 passengers. Solidarity! There have been protests right across the country. In Vaughan, north of Toronto, hundreds of people are blocking rail lines.
People are wanting to stay as long as possible until the government does something about what's happening.
The protesters are supporting the Wet'suwet'en elders in northern BC who oppose a liquefied natural gas pipeline that would cross their traditional territory. As for the meeting, it was held behind closed doors with little information coming out. Those who did witness it stormed out before it was done.
It really felt like it wasn't genuine. It was a runaround. It was almost insulting.
But even going into the meeting, the minister couldn't predict what would happen.
I can't guarantee what the outcome will be. It isn't mine to judge.
That's a sign the blockade isn't ending and the trains won't be running anytime soon.
Kamil, what's the Mohawk Nation asking for?
Robin, the blockade here is to show support for the Wet'suwet'en First Nation, but it's also for the Mohawk First Nation here to ask for some things for themselves, including better resources, better treatment, and cleaner water. Now, a resolution may not take place until another meeting happens. Crown-Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett and BC's Indigenous Relations Minister have agreed to meet with the Wet'suwet'en First Nation hereditary chiefs, but no date has been set as of yet. Robin?
Kamil Karamali in Belleville, Ontario. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's former Justice Minister is weighing in on the blockades. Jody Wilson-Raybould is a lawyer and was elected Regional Chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations. For her take, let's go to our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson. Mercedes?
Robin, Jody Wilson-Raybould has always taken a hard line on rule of law, but she's also criticized the government for not doing enough on reconciliation. So I asked her what she thinks about this situation. You were the Attorney General, and at that time, you were adamant about the importance of the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. In this particular case, we seem to be seeing the rule of law coming into conflict with the need for reconciliation. How do you balance those two things?
Well, I mean, as you said, I was the Attorney General. I believe fundamentally in the importance of the rule of law and upholding the rule of law. It is our responsibility to do so as a country. But when it comes to Indigenous peoples historically in this country who have been discriminated against, who have a long shadow of a colonial legacy and a history of the rule of law not being upheld, it's worth discussion. It's worth understanding that legacy of colonialism and understanding that the law has not been fairly applied when it comes to Indigenous peoples. And that speaks to the fundamental need for reconciliation, for understanding, and that is going to require all of us as a country to ensure that the rule of law is upheld and that the issues of Indigenous reconciliation and nation rebuilding, self-determination are addressed in a fundamental and transformative way.
I also talked to Ms. Wilson-Raybould about whether the police can be ordered to act by politicians to remove protesters and whether violence could be ahead, plus what she thinks the Prime Minister needs to do. I'll give you a hint. She thinks he needs to take much more leadership on this file. Robin?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. And you can watch the full interview with Jody Wilson-Raybould tomorrow on the West Block, right here on Global.